How's the semester treating you? We're getting to the very end, right? We have 2 classes this week. Next week, of course, we'll only see each other on Tuesday. And the following week, coming back from the Thanksgiving break, keep in mind that we also have class only on the Tuesday. On Thursday, I won't be here. I'll be in Florence for a conference, which is fine because I'll be seeing you during the Zoom presentations if you opt for the recommended default option of presenting in front of me, the alternative option being a pre-recorded video presentation. So this week I'll be introducing the last text, a novel called The Maids Across the Continent from 1911, part of a series with the same characters, a group of female high school students from New Haven, West Haven, Connecticut. I will continue today. I will discuss the major themes, the genre, etc. As usual, there will be another occasion next week where I will pull out some specific passages and episodes and I will discuss those. And both this Thursday and next Tuesday, I'll show you scenes from a 1932 racing film, The Crowd Roars, which is about two brothers. One is a great champion, a great star of motor racing, the other a younger brother who would like to have a similar career, would dreams of being mentored by his older brother into racing. But it's an interesting film for several reasons. There is a moralistic view of car racing, and the relationships between men and women are also a key part of that film. I will also, of course, we still have to watch a couple of scenes from Le Mans, right, to give it closure, to see how the relationship between Michael and Lisa evolves. Spoiler, it doesn't really develop into a full-fledged relationship. If there is time, I'll show those 2 scenes today. Otherwise, I'll do it on Thursday. And the last week of the semester, that Tuesday in December, when we will meet one last time, we can do we can have a review session. Just be forewarned that the way I envision a useful review session is not the same thing that most students would want, because other students, not you, but other students I've met would like the review session just be capsules that you memorize and bring to the final exam to have every possible answer ready. Whereas I see it as an opportunity for you to ask questions, an opportunity for me to go over either some of the key concepts or to give you an idea of key episodes, examples that can be used in the final exam, not therefore an occasion for you to bring home pre-packaged responses that one can regurgitate on the pages of the final exam. Okay, that would be the plan between now and the end of the semester. Of course, if especially I know that sometimes students travel far for Thanksgiving, etc. Just keep in mind, as usual, if you miss a class, you just have to wait for about 24 hours and the video recording of the lecture will be posted on my YouTube channel on the class wiki, and so you just go and watch as soon as you can the lecture you missed to stay on top of things, okay? If you happen to be in a situation where you cannot wait until Wednesday to join your family. Of course, you have here a reminder that you have a page for this week with links to the material. I posted a couple of announcements. I added pictures of the board, of the various schemas that I drew on the board during my introduction of Le Mans. In case you need them for reference, they're now placed towards the end of the page on Le Mans. I reviewed the calendar, decided to move the deadline for the final project up a few days. So December 15th is the new deadline. Of course, as usual, if you need an extension, a brief extension, because you have other deadlines or final exams, you need a day or two to finish, let me know in advance and I'll keep your Google Docs file open. Otherwise, in this case, the deadline is in fact enforced by the end of the day on December 15th. By midnight, the file will remain open just for viewing. So you'll be able to see the view the grade, the comments for the final project when I get to review it and grade it, but you won't be able to make changes past that deadline unless you've obtained an extension, and the file therefore remains open. You know, I'm the director of the Center for Italian Studies. We support the activities of the Ciao Club, which is a club for students who are interested in Italian things, not necessarily Italian majors or minors. You don't even need to know the language to participate, but we've organized this nice thing where you can go and prepare your own tiramisu in a space which is organized like a kitchen. If you're interested, you find the information in the announcements section. Seats are limited because this kitchen is limited to 20 people. And this is the presentation linked under week 13 that I'll be using today for reference. So some of the slides are from this page, and some are from links. There are many links. They're not required readings, but they're there to satisfy your curiosity. So when we talk about this young adult novel, Maids Across the Continents, we have a name for the author, Catherine Stokes, but Catherine Stokes was not a real person. It was just a pseudonym because the predominant marketing pattern during this period for children's literature, young adult fiction, was to make up a name that sounded believable and of the correct gender for your target readership. So in this case, since it is the Motor Maids, that's the name of the series, you want to have a female author. And then you hire a group. During this period, you would hire a group of writers, give them a template, that is to say, every writer knew who the characters had to be, the main qualities and features, the backgrounds of the protagonists of this group of female high school students traveling in different locales. And the publishing house would then set some expectations, right? That the novel be adventurous enough, that there should be some exotic elements which can be found within society. You'll notice as I explain the contents of this, or if you've read already the excerpts I posted online, there are many different ethnic groups, but especially ethnic groups living at the fringes, at the margins of society. There are different social classes, but there you find both the upper scale of social classes and the lowest being represented in one way or the other. There has to be the involvement of technology, and technology has to occupy a central, a crucial position in the novel. And then, based on this template, the various writers would work at the same time on different novels so that the publishing house could come out with a book every 2 months or a book every month. In this case, we have 6 or 7 of these books. Sometimes it's hard to tell. Some of the books did not survive. So this was an entertainment genre packaged according to criteria set by the publishing industry. So we don't know who wrote these books. We can assume that it was a group of ghostwriters, and they might have been of both, of different genders. Okay, I mentioned here the Stratemeyer Syndicate because this was the most successful group to bring forth this practice of pre-packaging books, offering templates to ghostwriters and then having them produce a series of novels. They, for example, also had some books inspired by the motor technologies, namely the Motor Boys, the Motor Girls series. You may know them, you may know of their characters because the Nancy Drew series, which was still being published in the US and in Europe during the 1960s and 70s, I read 1 or 2 of the Nancy Drew books and several of the Hardy Boys series. For the Nancy Drew, there was a film version made a few years ago, which is still streaming on various platforms. So keep this in mind. It's a simple book. The language is simple. The fictional patterns, the narrative arc are simple. The definition of the characters is really minimal, but it's interesting to us because of the centrality of the automotive technology. I've included links in my presentation so you can explore, but just to give you an idea, because when you think of Motor Boys, you might think that they're just involved in adventures with the automobile. In fact, every technology is represented. You see them, and by the way, even in this case, Clarence Young is a pseudonym, so not a real author, not one person only behind these books, and for the most part, we don't know who wrote them. You see how they're going to different places with different technologies. For example, you see here Motor Boys Over the Rockies, or A Mystery of the Air, and you see from the cover how they're using a dirigible or a hot air balloon to travel over the Rocky Mountains. Sometimes they're using the automobile, sometimes they're using motorboats or even submarines. Okay, so there is this exotic element connected to the technology. It has to be some kind of cutting-edge technology that makes the readers dream of adventures that allow them to escape from their reality. For the most part, these books were made very cheaply. They were very inexpensive. They were popular publications, right, to be placed in the hands of as many kids in the US as possible. By the 1920s, the Stratemeyer conglomerate publishing house was dominating the market. The majority of the books read by American kids were published by them. These are examples of the Motor Girls series, and you see here the ethnic, exotic component. For example, Motor Girls Through New England or Held by the Gypsies. And you'll find gypsies also in the motor maids across the continent. But there is this idea of mysterious groups whose social practices and norms are not well known by the core of society, such as the gypsies, but it could be the Native Americans, it could be cowboys or train robbers, and of course, held by the gypsies, there is a kidnapping, etc. Right? And again, there is the travel component. They're always venturing into different geographical areas. There is a human exotic component, and the other side of the exotic or picturesque aspect of the style of the book is the technology itself. For the Motor Maids series, these are the texts that we know of and that we can find even in digital format. So the first one was, as you can see, during the same year they had 3 published. The first one was the Motor Maids School Days, which is the introduction to this group of female students in Connecticut. Then you have the Motor Maids by Palm and Pine, where they go to Florida. The Motor Maids across the continent, which we are reading, where these girls are traveling from Chicago to San Francisco. You have the Motor Maids by Rose, Shamrock and Thistle, where they go to England and then finally to Ireland at the end of that book. You have them visiting Japan in Motor Maids in Fair Japan, or going to a camp in Motor Maids at Sunrise Camp. A few years ago, an American poet who was still alive in his early 80s, semi-famous Ron Padgett, found the book and was so fascinated by this young adult novel that he decided to rewrite it, still in the form of a novella, a short novel, and even the original is a novella. And I've included several links. You can see his book. Interestingly, for the cover, he picked a picture from 1909, where the woman at the steering wheel of this car is Alice Ramsey, who was the first woman to drive a car across the United States from the east to the west coast, accompanied by 3 other women. And you can find online a radio interview, the audio of an interview, where Ron is explaining why he picked this novel, why he thought that this was still current and interesting to modern readers. There are some inaccuracies. For example, they mention how the novel came out during World War I, which is not, of course, true. 1911 is when it was first published. And you find an excerpt online from chapter 1, where you can see that Ron Padgett, kept a lot of the original verbiage, the original language, the original situations in his own version of the novel. Here I added some information about motor boys, automobile girls. A lot of these series were successful during the 1900s and 1910s. In here, for example, you find the motor boys, but in the first book of adventures, the motor boys are cyclists, as you see in here, following a development that was common even to paid chauffeurs, paid drivers during that period. A lot of them, we know anecdotally, came from racing bicycles, and once they were not so young enough for that sport professionally, they moved into automobiles because they were used to handling the mechanical side of the bicycles, and they had a reputation for being daring people because they would run the bicycles in these oval tracks with a wooden surface, often with steeped banks where they could drive very quickly. So even the motor boys start as cyclists, and only at the end of the book, chapter 30, this is when they receive a letter that they will be getting an automobile and continue their adventures with the automobile. In here you see the cover of the Automobile Girls in the Berkshires. And again, Laura Dent Crane is probably a pseudonym. And you see under the name of the author, the whole series of books mentioned. At Newport, the Automobile Girls at Newport, along the Hudson, etc. Right, the different places they visit. And look at the cover. You get a sense, even in the Motor Maid Across the Continent, you find a similar kind of car. So it's a big car. Keep this in mind. You have teenage girls entrusted with driving this kind of big car, big enough for 5, 6, or 7 people, right? Normally, on a car like this, you might see a paid chauffeur and 2 or 3 upper-class couples going out on a trip. In this case, you have a group of 5 women. One of them is older because you always need to meet the moral standards of society. You always need a more mature female character to act as a chaperone, to make sure that the novel itself is not perceived as dangerous for the education of the readers, but in fact, we'll see that this chaperone is not really keeping the behavior of the characters always in check. Sometimes the chaperone is there to sanction something that is slightly at the edge of what is allowed, but what's significant is a group of young women, a huge car, that they're driving independently with no men around. In this case, the background, of course, is representative of Newport, but both thinking of the setting and looking at their clothes, you also get the sense that at least some of the characters belong to wealthy upper-class families, and the novels themselves are made for lower-class readers who will just dream of a different lifestyle through the adventures they read about in the books. It's kind of a vicarious experience. And affluence is not just affording the main characters the purchase and the operation of a car, but consumerism can be a theme in the novels altogether. This idea that as a reader, you dream of a lifestyle where whatever you desire, you can get right away. You don't have to wait. You don't have to ask for permission. And we'll talk about the role or the absence of the family in these novels. The characters, no matter how young, are mostly independent, even in life. You see a better view of the kind of big car I was referring to. And this is the inside frontispiece of the Automobile Girls at Newport. And of course, the same publisher is publishing a different series of novels for young adults. And you can see how by this time they've developed different niches. One niche for readers interested in that is Automobile Girls, right? And they mention 3 of their titles. They also have Circus Boys. They also published High School Girls series. Okay, so they're going for readers who will pursue their specific interest connected to a technology or an exotic environment such as the circus, or high school as a place where you can develop your own identity in contrast with the rules, the outer rules of society and the schools themselves. Now, what was going on in real life? My concern was also provide you with some basic information. We've talked a lot about women in fictional texts, novels, and short stories. the empowerment of women through the operation or the purchase of an automobile, what was happening in real life. In real life as well, women were pioneers of the technology. And since we're talking about journeying from one side of the United States to another, clearly the reference historically must go to people such as Alice Ramsey, 1909, going across the United States accompanied by 3 other women. And later on, but much later, she wrote a memoir about this. Or Anita King, also nicknamed the Paramount Girl, who did something similar by herself, sponsored by Paramount, that Paramount, the studio, the production company, film production company, that produced a series of products for theaters based on this. A documentary, because of course the car itself used by Anita to drive across the United States in 1915 was sponsoring this, so they produced a documentary, which was another way to sell cars from that company, to market the brand associated with this. And then they also had a cinematic version of this adventure called The Race that came out the next year. So it was a big marketing operation. In here you see Alice Ramsey in front of her car. And in here you see Anita King with Barney Oldfield, whom we've seen in 2 of the silent films about the automobile. This is a picture from 1917. She went across the United States in 1915, and down below you find a picture from that year with the car she used. The car you see in the background was called the Submarine and was used by Barney Oldfield for exhibition races across the United States. At some point, he left racing. He was also a controversial driver, was sometimes excluded for aggressive driving. So he would just go from town to town to drive around the track at high speeds, challenge local drivers, etc. And there would be other celebrities invited that people would recognize from the movies or from theaters, because they both also appeared on the stage in theaters. They would be invited for plays to be seen, or when plays had automobiles on the stage. To give you a sense of how long this continued, this idea of women involved in long distance racing of different kinds, challenges, demonstration. I've included other references. For example, Nell Richardson, together with Alice Burke, went on a road trip across the country, sponsored by the Suffrage Association. So she was both showcasing the technology, demonstrating that women and men, the gender gap, can be eliminated in several areas of society, starting with the use of the automobile, and was promoting the idea that women should have voting rights. So you see how a trending product is, the automobile is associated with a trending issue, voting rights and human rights in general for women, because there was a lot of attention that the automobile could garner. Violet Cordery was a British female driver called the Long Distance Lady, and you can see her here. And during the 1920s, she set all kinds of records for long distance journeys with the car, from 5,000 miles all the way to, what was the top? I think it was 30,000 miles that she drove continuously. She would either alternate with her sister, so each would do a stint while the other was resting, or depending on the nature of the long distance feat of strength that they were doing, they would drive every day for 10, 12 hours a day, rest during the night, go back the next day, and across a time of 20 days, 30 days, they would rack up all these miles. Okay, and actually, Violet died in the 1980s, about in 1983, I think. So about 40 years ago. So we're not so removed from the era in which such women existed. Okay, as I've said multiple times, forget about the stereotypes about female drivers not being adept at using the automobiles. Those became part of comedy, TV comedies, films during the post-war era. But when the automobile as technology was introduced, women occupied a position of a primary position in the development of the technology, in the marketing of the technology. Let's go back to motor maids across the continent. The first thing to notice is that the automobile is not the only technology that is on display in this novel, because, as I said, technology contributes to the exotic nature of the adventure. So the automobile by 1911 is almost normalized, and they need to include more than just the automobile. And therefore, yes, you have this big red car where 5 or 6 people can ride, called the Comet, but you also have an airplane. And you have here the description of the airplane the moment it appears on the plains outside of Chicago, while the motor maids are driving from Chicago all the way to San Francisco, of course, in different stages, flying westward, but still some distance away came what resembled at first a gigantic bird with wings outspread. And you can see from the style that this is young adult fiction, right? There is this emphatic kind of style, right? Before you understand this is a plane, it is perceived and described, represented as a gigantic bird with wings outspread, soaring even as the fishhawk soars as he skims through the air. And then Billy, who's the driver and the mechanic on the Red Comet, and also the protagonist, one of the protagonists in the novel itself, with her competency, her expertise, she will explain to the others and to the readers as well. It's an airplane, and of course she's almost speechless with excitement. And at some point there is also, of course, a motorcycle, which was considered a bit more exotic and rare than a car in 1911. If you want to place a technology at the center of a fictional narrative, and you want to assign the proper emphasis to the technology in a social context, then you need to qualify the users of that technology. You need to make sure the reader understands who is using the technology, under which circumstances, and how you, the reader and potential buyer of the product in a distant or not so distant future, relate to these characters. So it cannot be a series of random characters doing this. They have to be qualified psychologically as well as socially. So we said they're a group of high school female students from West Haven, Connecticut. The protagonist, the leader of the group in some ways, is Billy, one of those students. She drives the car. She's also able to repair the car. So she's fully competent in this, and therefore she's offering proof and evidence that women readers who are the target of this novel can immerse themselves in this experience. They can see themselves in the future doing the same thing with the automobile, right? And again, these are the same young readers who might have heard of Alice and the other women involved in various feats with the automobile, driving from coast to coast, driving long distances, etc. She's the romantic heroine, romantic because, of course, relationships are a driving force for the narrative, right? She will not, in the Motor Maid, really have a relationship, but there is this kind of romantic tension between her and various male characters. She's the daughter of a railroad engineer, so there is this sense that engineering is in her blood, in her family. And she's an orphan, she doesn't have a mother. In fact, even the father is completely absent because at the time of the adventures described in the novel, the father is away in Russia to work on a railroad, and therefore Billy is by herself with her slightly older cousin, a single woman in her 20s. But this is typical of the protagonists of young adult fiction for a very long time throughout the 20th century and to this day, right? Harry Potter or other characters similarly don't have any strings attached. They're free from their family. They don't have someone telling them what to do. They're free to embark in a variety of adventures, right? So you see that independence is inscribed in the setup, in the premise to the novel itself. Then you have the friends, and the friends, Mary, Nancy, Eleanor, are pretty much interchangeable. They're not really distinguished from one another. They're not three-dimensional characters. And of course, while traveling, they will pick up different people. Some of the characters they pick up and that who ride with the Motor Maids are men, for example, Peter Van Vecht, and some of them are women, young women, such as Evelyn, which will become a new friend for this book, reappear in several chapters and situations. As I said, they're accompanied by a chaperone, so they cannot be completely free, completely independent. Because if you want to sell a book to young adults, then you also have to reassure the family that what their daughters, nieces are reading is acceptable, is somewhat aligned with the norms of society. And that's why you need to have a representative chaperone. In this case, would be cousin Helen. And she is present. She is speaking from the very first page of the novel. It is cousin Helen who at the beginning of the novel says, "Oh, at my age to embark on such an adventure." And what is she worried about from the point of view of her own reputation or honorability? She's worried that what she's about to do, go from Chicago to San Francisco with a group of young women, is not appropriate for her age, meaning it is not appropriate or fully appropriate for a grown woman, for a mature woman who should know better, who should be aware of the norms of society, of the censorship, of the consequences of traveling by herself, venturing into the world without the protection or the sanction of a male figure, okay? However, as I said, what you find in this book, similarly to what we noticed even in, for example, The Lightning Conductor, is that there is nothing completely radical, completely revolutionary. They're just trying to push the norms. They're going in the direction of empowering women through representative characters who are very independent, who go out in the world, who affirm their role, their presence in society without the need for male protection, male escort. But the rules, the existing norms, are only tested in peculiar circumstances. The fact that the adventures take place in exotic locales and in very unique circumstances confirms that regular society is not ready to accept this kind of behavior. That is to say, it would be much more radical if the characters acted in the same way in their own town of West Haven, where people know them, where relatives can see them or interact with them. But that's not the case. They're only so free and so independent during this journey, so for a period of time that is limited, and outside of regular society, where those norms cannot be enforced because the circumstances are so unique. So it's a way to showcase a different kind of behavior, a bolder kind of behavior, while reassuring that they're not trying to subvert completely those norms within core society, within the regular, frequent, normative situations. So, in reference to mobility, what is the danger, the risk that enhanced mobility enhanced by the use of the automobile, can have on the characters? That the characters might be perceived as aligning themselves with people who, by virtue of their own mobility, are placed at the margins of society. Gypsies, who are perceived as modern nomads, vagabonds, right, homeless people traveling from place to place, and immigrants, right? And all of them will be represented in the book in one way or the other. But what is the risk? The risk is to lose one's identity because you're seen as not having roots. Not having roots means not having traditions, not coming from a tradition of norms and practices that has been established in a place that is guaranteed by the people, the community that lives in that very place. Because if you move from place to place, then you're not subject to the censorship of the same people. You don't have to worry about your reputation because you'll be moving on, and therefore whatever negative judgment can be issued about you, whatever sanction may be threatened because of your outlandish behavior, will not last. There won't be any consequences because you will not be there. You're not grounded. You don't have a place in that community that is trying to normalize your own behavior. Okay? So keep this in mind. The first 2 pages of the novel are the most important because they contain a manifesto. Mobility is great. It means freedom, but these are the risks involved with an exaggerated change in the style of mobility afforded by the automobile. As I said earlier, the chaperone is there not to limit, not so much to limit, curtail the behavior of these young characters. She does that to a degree. For example, she will give judgments, assess the moral character of the male individuals that they meet on the road, right? Trying to warn these young girls about potential dangers in developing a relationship, getting too close to these male characters. But otherwise, the girls can do whatever they want. And the presence of the chaperone seems to sanction, make appropriate whatever they are doing. That is to say, it reinforces edgy behaviors and practices exactly because the novel is not implying that these girls are behaving in a way that is not so socially acceptable because they're unsupervised. They're supervised and therefore they're risky behavior can be considered somewhat acceptable by the readers, because there is an adult woman who's not reacting in such a negative way or moralistic way to the behavior of the girls. Okay, so it makes it somewhat acceptable, although keep in mind how displacing the less acceptable social behavior, placing it in exotic places outside of regular society, makes that can be interpreted as an attempt to show that is an exception, that they're not trying to change regular society completely. Of course, there is also the risk of going so much out of the so far out of what is socially acceptable that you lose your honor. You're seen as a model of femininity that is not acceptable and not being marriage material, right? There is that risk that is mentioned. So in here you find a few passages that are interesting. The first, from page 8, is when they've just left Chicago. People are still asleep, but you get the sense that they're exiting from normative society. Because you have to set the scene of this passage. The girls with cousin Ellen are in this big car. They're driving through the middle class and upper class suburbs of Chicago, while people are tending to the daily tasks and routines, but they are doing something that places them outside already before they venture into the adventurous, exotic areas of the American Western frontier. Already they feel this difference, they feel this separation, they feel that this model, having a house, going through your daily tasks, is not them, right? That's why you find this nice description: through Chicago they whirled past fine homes where sleepy maids and butlers were just opening windows, so this is the upper class part of the city, and blinds to let in the morning light, through business streets already humming with life, and at last out through the suburbs on a broad level road due west they took their course. So they're leaving society behind to embark in this adventure, and it's clear that they're feeling the distance, the difference between them and society in general, urban society. And to make this clear, just in the next page, Eleanor, one of the girls, is given this statement to clarify to the readers that the staple of this journey is freedom, independence. Was it only last week that we were 4 schoolgirls at West Haven High School slaving over examinations, cried Eleanor Butler. Only a little week ago, exclaimed Mary joyfully, and now, behold us, free as birds on the wing. And finally, a little later, another statement where they acknowledge that their new life on the road is similar to a play. They don't use film because, yes, of course, there are films, but they haven't surpassed the popularity of theater. So they feel like they're part of a fictional adventure, right? As if they've entered the scenes of a play. It's like being in a play, Eleanor, whispered Mary, who was sitting next to her at a long dinner table in the dining room of the little hotel. They're all here. Cowboys. Keep in mind, cowboys are exotic social figures at this point, and curious-looking people, exotic people, right? And there were 2 Indians at the door a moment ago. The cowboys are like Bernie McGee, who's one of the first cowboys they meet, who's cowboy through and through. They have good rough manners. And this is the combination that you find through the book. Good and rough. Good manners, because of course, these characters they encounter or fall in love with or experience romantic tension with have to be good boys in a way, right? They cannot be anarchists. They cannot be social outliers completely. But they have to have something rough. So they have to be at the edge of what is acceptable in society. So they know they're venturing out of what is acceptable. There is this sense of a risky behavior or a risky social context. One of the components that makes the novel both exotic and picturesque is the fact that there are characters that are representative of the world from the past that is about to disappear. This is typical of many books, including travel books from the early 1900s. The sense that modernity is about to kill the past. And therefore, a cowboy becomes interesting because they imagine that 10 years later, 20 years later, there will be no cowboys or no cowboys that are genuine, like the characters they encounter. So it becomes an exotic journey because thanks to the automobile, they get to experience a world that is about to disappear and be killed by industrialization. So you have this paradox. They're traveling on the key product of an industry, the automobile. But they use it to venture into the frontier, into rural areas where they want to experience a portion of the past that is about to disappear and therefore feels even more romantic, okay? So they'll find cowboys that are seen as the last cowboys, right? Because of course cowboys will be replaced by automobiles. One of them is Daniel, the other is Bernie McGee that we found mentioned. They'll find an authentic British aristocrat. But that too is seen as part of a past, of a traditional past that will disappear. Aristocracy is not the future from the point of view of American society from 1911. And of course, he has a very British sounding name, Algernon Whiston. They'll find Native Americans, but not just Native Americans who are still engaging in a rebellion against American society, right? It's like 50 years after Little Big Horn, the battles between the American army and the natives, you still find the remnants, the last group of surviving warriors, right? They'll find train robbers, still part of the lore of the frontier. And of course, because in the same way that you find together good and rough, train robbers represented as being dangerous, but at the same time, they'll manage to redeem one of them, to make this train robber into a model citizen. So you find the same contrast between the sense of risk and respect of the norms or respect of the process of normalization. So they're always at the edge between embracing a more radical lifestyle and be pulled back into society. They'll find Mormons, but those Mormons are unreformed. Again, a remnant from the past, right? So Mormons who still live according to rules that have not been accepted by the American federal government, and therefore they're an exotic group whose lifestyle and practices are seen as mysterious, secretive. They'll find immigrants, Italian Americans near San Francisco who have a restaurant, a vineyard, and therefore they're not Italian Americans who've come to Chicago or New York, have been assimilated, work and live the American lifestyle, work in an urban environment, following pretty much the same rules. No, they've transplanted their ethnic practices in California, so they're living as if they were still in Italy. And therefore, they're exotic, they're picturesque, right? They're different from regular people. There is a sense that they're doing the same challenge, driving over such a long distance, as the heroines or the heroes of their times that you see in the newsreels, in the documentaries, in the newspapers, right? And that there is indirectly a prize connected to this. I've driven from San Francisco to Chicago, and therefore I'm different from the others. I'm worthy of other people's attention, curiosity, questions, right? But there is also this contrast, this dichotomy being played out dynamically between new and old. For example, one of the themes is nostalgia. They feel nostalgic. They feel they miss home. They talk about Connecticut. They talk about their family relatives in Connecticut who are reading a book by the fireplace, right? Living the quiet life that is the opposite of mobility. So they feel the nostalgia for that lifestyle because they're on the road constantly. At the same time, to balance, you have the excitement of exploring the frontier, being at the center of various adventures, a train robbery, being kidnapped, trying to escape police, helping a train robber escape the police arrest by dressing him up as a woman himself to be presented as part of their group. And then we know that he'll make an honest living once he settles in a different place. They're suspended between past and future. They're the future. The future is technological, industrialized. The future is the automobile, the plane, the motorcycle. And they're embracing this future, but they're using the technology to go back in time, to go and find the last cowboys, the last Native Americans who are still warriors, the last train robbers before it'll become impossible to rob a train. And there is this sense, the general sense of nostalgia for the past. Arcadia is a myth in various literature, starting with classical Greek literature. This idea that you venture out of an urban setting to find a place where people still live in harmony, appreciate core traditional values that drive social interaction, respect for each other, respect for or a sense of family and family values. The same that you find in those Christmas movies and other movies, right, that are still popular on American channels, right? Where the pattern is always an American woman on a path to a tremendous career as a manager is sent to a village to close down a bakery or some kind of local activity, and she falls in love with the baker without knowing who it is. They fall out of love once he finds out that she's there to close his shop, and then she finds a way to conjugate past and present, tradition and novelty by making the bakery profitable in some way. You always have this dichotomy at the core of fictional entertainment, different genres of entertainment, okay? There is, though, the awareness that the racial configuration of American society is changing, right? That American society is diversifying, that the people that are seen as exotic are there to stay, right? And keep in mind, exotic can be seen both in the presence of these technologies that are so different and in the ethnic, racial composition of the characters throughout the novel. The style is very simple. Often, as we saw, for example, even in Jules Verne, the narrator will stop and say, what is going to happen now? Will this happen? Will they be arrested by the police? Or will they be able to escape arrest? Will they be held captive by a train robber? Will they be able to escape these bandits? Okay? it's the easiest way, the most descriptive way to create tension. Sometimes you just find descriptions, simple transitions. All the adventures are exterior, meaning they don't touch the characters deep in their inner core. They're adventures that come to them from the outside. They're mechanical obstacles they find, right? The car will break down. They'll they'll find themselves lost on the road because they've missed a sign. They've taken the wrong fork on the road. And all the tension socially comes from having enemies, having rivals, right? They're still outside. There is no inner turmoil. There is no emotional development inside the characters. And of course, some are real enemies. They're thieves, they're criminals. And others are more difficult to explain. They've played a prank to a high school teacher. And now, apparently, there is a mysterious relative of this teacher living in the West that has promised revenge because of this prank. And you cannot forget the characters are wealthy, because this is also a novel about consumerism, right? They can get whatever they want. They have no financial issues because this is what the readers want to read about. Readers from lower classes, readers who may be struggling in their environment, in their family. And there is a strong connection suggested between wealth, consumerism, and changes in lifestyle, right? If you're rich enough, then your life will change in all kinds of unexpected way. You'll enjoy experiences that you couldn't otherwise afford. This idea that money buys experiences, which is still being hyped in today's marketing campaigns, has been done to death. In spite of YouTube being full of people who have all sorts of experiences with almost no money, right? And the only psychological changes are warming up to behaviors that could be considered risky. They're not entirely immoral or dishonest, but the optics are such that your reputation could be at stake. So they're actually edging the norms. They're exploring the boundaries of social norms in unique circumstances. In terms of relationships, the protagonist has two that are important. Of course, not to mention the car itself, right? There is strong connection between Billy and her car called the Comet. But then there are two male counterparts with whom she might be developing a relationship, or she's thinking of them. One is Peter, the aeroplanist, the airplane pilot who crashes his plane in front of the girls. He is rescued by Billy and then continues on his journey, a stretch of his journey with them. And very much a romantic hero because the plane is like the horse in a fairy tale. And later we learned that he could be a thief, that maybe he robbed a jewelry store or a bank in Chicago and used the plane to get away, right? And the fact that he's a thief on a plane makes him even more romantic and creates this possibility of a dark side. Again, very much a good guy from whatever they know about him, behaving very mildly, but the idea that he might have a dark side, that he might be a thief, makes their relationship more exciting, right? And you see here the celebration of how the plane flying through the air makes him exciting, a romantic character. So even Peter is very much defined by the technology associated with him. Then this is Peter represents the new. There is another male counterpart for Billy, possible romantic interest, who represents the past, And is Daniel Moore a cowboy? So exotic in many ways, and among other things, he's a farmer with Japanese servants, but he's also a wholesome guy, a wealthy farmer, right? Not a rough cowboy at all. There are a lot of situations where somebody has to be rescued, and rescuing somebody is accompanied by some kind of social reward in terms of attention, right? Establishes a connection. What's interesting is that it's not just men rescuing women, but both. So sometimes is a woman, female character rescuing a man, and sometimes the opposite. So you find both traditional norms and the subversion or the reversal of those norms. So Billy rescues Peter, she rescues Daniel as well. She's rescued in other situations. And I've talked about edging the norms and the kind of limited nature of the trouble that the characters encounter. I'll just mention this episode because it's very interesting, very representative of edging norms. You have a character climbing up a tree with pants. So not only is she wearing pants, which is of course different, but she's exposing herself by getting high on a tree. They've lost their car, the car was stolen, and they're trying to locate the car. And then they wonder what people who saw them must have thought, right? They're seen by a man, and then Billy says, well, she must have thought I was a suffragette, meaning a woman supporting women's right to vote, meaning she must have thought I was a feminist, right? Dangerous feminist. Or dressing up the robber as a woman to escape arrest. That is also edging the norms. In terms of the dynamics between desire and the target of desire, there is a parallel between romancing the man, thinking, dreaming of a relationship with one of these heroic or exotic men, and romancing products, meaning it's the same kind of dynamic pattern. The idea is still the same. There is no one to prevent me from getting what I want. If I want to pursue this relationship, I can do it right now. I don't have to ask for permission from my family, from the chaperone there. But the same pattern is transferred to consumerism. If there is a product I want, then I should be able to get it just because I feel this desire, this urge to get it. There should be no pause, no delay, no permission or authorization that prevents me from getting that product right away. And keep in mind, all of this is happening under unique circumstances, not within regular society. So it's still seen as an exception. And where are the traditional agencies enforcing values? Family is largely absent, right? Family is distant, it's just a memory, a thought. Of course, they think of their family. They also say, what would this member of my family think right now of us in these circumstances? So there is some self-censorship, some self-inhibition, but they're distant, largely removed. They talk a lot about school, and in the book, the school Motor Maids, the school days, you find more of that. But the school is not the place where norms are enforced. The school is the place where you try to get your identity against the rules, against the adults there, where you're trying to fight with your group of friends, with your supportive tribe, clan, to establish a new identity. So the school becomes the stage for social experiments, not a place where you have to abide by norms. So even the school doesn't represent a strong enough authority And society in general, since you're moving all the time, society is there to put their eyes on you because you're driving an automobile, because you're behaving in a certain way. So it's all about the attention you're getting from the other people through, among other things, the products you surround yourself with, the automobile, your clothing, etc. And of course, your identity is at least partly based on the commodities that you surround yourself with. For example, let's focus on this passage from Maids' School Days, the arrival of Billy in the car. First, you notice the car, then you notice Billy, and Billy is associated with the car, is defined by the car, right? It's not a person, but a person who owns and drives a car. Far down the road, a brilliant red object could be seen approaching. They have to define it an object to create a sense of suspense, of anticipation, of mystery. What is it? It was enveloped in a cloud of dust, and it moved with great rapidity. There is a sense of tension. Why? It's nothing but a red automobile, cried Eleanor in disappointment. Yes, admitted Nancy. It's an automobile, but there is something unusual about it besides its color. What's unusual? A girl is running it. So being the girl, the only one in the school who drives an automobile, defines her. She doesn't need to develop a social identity because she's been defined by the technology or by the product, if you will. And a lot of this can be found in American films, especially from the 20th century, right? Especially about school age kids falling in love, having troubled social interactions, etc. Right? Not only a girl is running it, but also no one is with her. So the car represents her independence, her freedom, empowers her to move out of her family, move out of society, to try different things. Right? And you find another description of the car in here from page 7. Graceful little machine, large enough to hold 5 or 6 people. So it's not a small machine by any measure. Small machine would be a roadster for 2 people. Its body painted a warm and pleasing shade of red, its cushion upholstered in a slightly darker shade, which harmonized perfectly with the rest of the body. So elegance is emphasized in the automobile because this way you understand how Billy's identity in public, her social persona, is scaffolded by her association with this kind of technology. Of course, since Billy is a female character, she refers to the car as he. The comet is he. And the car, it becomes anthropomorphic. The car is humanized, right? He, the comet, gets cranky and unmanageable exactly like a human being. So there is the suggestion of this symbiotic relationship with the car. This is where on page 8 they tell you about the background of Billy, how she lives with her cousin Miss Campbell. This is Helen. And her father is an engineer who's away to Russia building a railroad. So she's different, right? She's more independent